Have you ever watched someone lose everything in a single camera flash, only to own the world 10 minutes later? You need to hear the story of Vivian Calloway. Last Tuesday, at the Global Tech Gala in New York, the world watched her husband, Preston, shove her out of the frame to pose with his mistress. It was brutal. It was viral. The internet called her the discarded wife. But what Preston didn't know, what nobody knew, was that the man walking up to the microphone to interrupt the humiliation wasn't just the richest man in the room. He was Vivian's father, and he was about to change the will. The flashing lights of the paparazzi felt less like adoration and more like an interrogation. The red carpet outside the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a battlefield of tulle, silk, and desperate ambition. Vivian stood near the velvet rope, her fingers white-knuckling the clutch of her vintage Dior gown. It was a beautiful dress, a soft emerald green that brought out the flecks of gold in her eyes. But tonight, she felt like she was wearing a shroud. 5 feet away, her husband, Preston Calloway, was holding court. Preston was the golden boy of Manhattan real estate, with his jawline sharp enough to cut glass and a smile that had graced the cover of Forbes. He was the man everyone wanted to know. And tonight, he was making it very clear who he wanted to be seen with. It wasn't Vivian. Standing tucked under his arm, laughing with her head thrown back, was Sienna Blake. Sienna was 22, an influencer, with 6 million followers and a reputation for wrecking homes. She was wearing a dress that was barely there, a shimmering web of diamonds and sheer fabric that screamed for attention. "Preston, to the left! Preston, look here!" the photographers screamed, a wall of sound. Vivian took a tentative step forward. This was the biggest night of the year. They were supposed to walk the carpet together. That was the agreement. They had rehearsed it. Preston needed the image of the stable family man to close the deal on the Hudson Yards project. "Preston?" she whispered, though her voice was swallowed by the chaos. She moved closer, attempting to slip her hand into the crook of his arm, a practiced motion she had done 1,000 times over 5 years of marriage. Preston recoiled. It wasn't subtle. He jerked his arm away as if she had burned him. He turned, his eyes cold and hard, contrasting sharply with the warm smile he had just bestowed upon the cameras. "What are you doing?" he hissed, low enough that the microphones wouldn't catch it, but loud enough to shatter her heart. "You're stepping on Sienna's train. Back off, Vivian. You're ruining the shot." We're supposed to—" "I said back off," Preston snapped. He placed a hand on her shoulder, not affectionately but with firm, pushing pressure, and physically moved her out of the frame. "Go inside. Wait by the coat check. Don't embarrass me." The movement caught the eye of a photographer from TMZ. "Did you see that?" someone shouted. "Get the wife. Get the reaction." The cameras swiveled. For a horrifying moment, Vivian was the sole focus, not for her beauty, but for her rejection. She could hear the murmurs ripple through the press line. "Is that Vivian Calloway?" Preston just totally iced her. "Who is that girl he's with? Is that the TikTok girl?" Vivian felt the heat rise up her neck. She looked at Preston, silently pleading for him to fix this, to pull her back in, to laugh it off as a misunderstanding. But he had already turned his back to her. He was whispering something into Sienna's ear that made her giggle and press her chest against his tuxedo jacket. They posed. Flash, flash, flash. The power couple of the evening, Preston Calloway and his mistress. And Vivian stood alone in the shadows of the red carpet, a ghost in her own marriage. A security guard, a large man named Frank, who had worked the door at these events for years, looked at her with genuine pity. "Mrs. Calloway," he murmured, unhooking the rope. "Maybe you should head up the stairs. It's getting cold out here." Vivian nodded, fighting back the tears that threatened to ruin her makeup. "Thank you, Frank." She walked up the iconic steps alone. The sound of the photographers shouting Preston's name faded behind her, but the shame clung to her skin like oil. She checked her phone. Twitter was already trending. #Calloway, #wife left behind. A video had been uploaded. It showed the shove. It had 50,000 views in 3 minutes. She reached the top of the stairs and ducked into the ladies' room, locking herself in the furthest stall. She sat on the toilet lid, shaking. She shouldn't be here. She should be back in her small apartment in Queens, the one she lived in before she met Preston, before she became Vivian Calloway, the lucky girl who married up. Everyone thought she was a gold digger. That was the narrative Preston's publicist had spun. The poor orphan girl with no family name, no connections, who had snagged the heir to the Calloway fortune. They said she should be grateful. They said she should tolerate his affairs because, really, where else would she go? She had no family, no money of her own. Preston made sure of that with a prenup that was tighter than a bank vault. Or so they thought. Vivian took a deep breath and opened her clutch. Inside, nestled next to her lipstick, was a small black velvet pouch. She hadn't opened it in 7 years. Her phone buzzed again. A text message, unknown number. I saw the live stream. Are you ready to stop playing games, Vivi? Or do you enjoy letting that clown humiliate the Sterling bloodline? Vivian stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered over the reply button. She typed 2 words. I'm ready. She wiped her eyes, fixed her lipstick, and stood up. The woman who walked into the stall was Vivian Calloway. The humiliated wife, the woman who walked out, was someone else entirely. To understand the magnitude of what was about to happen in the grand ballroom, you have to understand the lie Vivian had been living. 5 years ago, Vivian met Preston at a coffee shop in Brooklyn. She was working as a freelance copywriter, wearing oversized sweaters and glasses, hiding from a world she knew too well. Preston was charming then. He didn't know who she really was. To him, she was just a challenge, a pretty, quiet girl who didn't seem impressed by his Porsche. He pursued her relentlessly. Flowers, dinners, trips to the Hamptons. Vivian, lonely and estranged from her father, fell for it. She thought he loved her for her, not for a last name she refused to use. When he proposed, she tried to tell him. Preston, there's something about my family, she had started. It doesn't matter, Viv, he had interrupted, kissing her forehead. I don't care that you come from nothing. I have enough for both of us. We'll be the Calloways. That's all that matters. She had let the lie stand. It was easier. She wanted to be normal. But as soon as the ring was on her finger, the mask slipped. Preston's mother, a woman made of ice and old pearls, sneered at Vivian's lack of pedigree. Preston became controlling. He criticized her clothes, her laugh, her friends. He isolated her. And then came the allowance. He refused to let her work. It looks bad if my wife works, he said. So he gave her a monthly stipend, barely enough to maintain the appearance he demanded. He checked the receipts. If she bought a coffee he didn't approve of, he'd lecture her on fiscal responsibility while wearing a $50,000 watch. For 3 years, the affairs had been whispered. Late nights at the office, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. Lipstick on collars, he claimed, were from aggressive aunts. But tonight was different. Tonight, he had brought Sienna. Back in the gala, the atmosphere was electric. The theme was Gilded Age Renaissance, a celebration of wealth and power. The room was filled with billionaires, tech moguls, and royalty. Vivian stood near a pillar, holding a glass of sparkling water she didn't drink. She watched Preston across the room. He was introducing Sienna to the CEO of Chimera Tech. Sienna was laughing, touching Preston's chest, acting the part of the doting wife Vivian was supposed to be. Pathetic, isn't it? The voice came from beside her. Vivian turned to see a woman in a sharp red tuxedo. It was Beatrice Thorne, the most feared gossip columnist in New York. She had a pen poised over a notebook. "Hello, Beatrice," Vivian said softly. "He's really outdone himself this time, darling," Beatrice drawled, nodding toward Preston. "Bringing the mistress to the Sterling Foundation Gala. That's bold, or stupid, probably stupid. Vivian stiffened. The Sterling Foundation? Yes, Beatrice looked at her, confused. Didn't you know? They're the primary sponsors tonight. Old man Sterling finally came out of hiding. Rumour has it he's looking for a successor. Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs. Her father was here, Richard Sterling. The name was synonymous with American industry. Steel, tech, aerospace. The Sterling fortune made the Callaways look like they were playing with monopoly money. But Richard was a recluse. He hadn't been seen in public since his wife, Vivian's mother, died 10 years ago. That death was why Vivian left. She blamed him for her mother's unhappiness. He blamed her for being rebellious. They hadn't spoken since she was 22. "Excuse me," Vivian murmured, stepping away from Beatrice. She needed to find him before he found her. If Richard Sterling saw Preston treating his daughter like trash, he wouldn't just get angry. He would incinerate the entire building. But before she could move, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight hit the center stage. The chatter died down. The heavy velvet curtains parted. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed, "please welcome the host of tonight's evening, the chairman of Sterling Industries, Mr. Richard Sterling." The room gasped. It was really him. Richard Sterling walked onto the stage. He was 70, but he moved with the vigor of a man half his age. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than Preston's house. His hair was silver, his eyes sharp blue, the exact same shade as Vivian's. He gripped the podium. He didn't smile. "Good evening," Richard said. His voice was gravel and authority. "I haven't been to New York in a long time. I've been watching my company, watching the market." He paused, and his eyes scanned the crowd. He seemed to be looking for someone. "And," Richard continued, "I've been watching my family." In the crowd, Preston was whispering to Sienna, not paying attention. He was too busy texting his broker. He didn't notice the laser focus of the billionaire on stage. "Tonight was supposed to be about charity," Richard said, "but I've decided to make it about legacy. For years, people have asked who will inherit the Sterling empire. They assume I have no one. They assume the line ends with me." Vivian froze. She was standing in the shadows, 40 feet from the stage. Richard's eyes locked onto hers. Even in the dim light, she felt the connection, the apology, the rage, the promise. "I have a daughter," Richard announced. The room erupted. Whispers flew like shrapnel. "Daughter? What daughter?" Preston's head snapped up. He looked around, confused. "Daughter?" he muttered to Sienna. "Sterling has a daughter? Why didn't I know this?" "I have a daughter," Richard repeated, louder this time, "and she is in this room." He pointed a finger into the crowd. "But I see she is not being treated with the respect a Sterling deserves." The spotlight operator, acting on instructions given 5 minutes prior via a headset, swung the heavy beam of light. It swept across the room, bypassing the celebrities, the politicians, and the models. It landed squarely on Vivian. She blinked, blinded by the light. Preston, who was standing 20 feet away, squinted. He saw the woman in the spotlight. He saw the green dress. "Vivian?" he laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "Why is the light on my wife? Is this a joke?" Richard Sterling's voice thundered through the speakers, silencing Preston's laugh instantly. "It is no joke, Mr. Calloway. Step away from that woman you are with. You are standing in the presence of my heir, my daughter, Vivian Sterling." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Preston looked at the billionaire on stage. He looked at Vivian, his dowdy, quiet, poor wife. He looked back at the billionaire. The resemblance was undeniable. The eyes, the chin. Preston's face went from arrogance to sheer, unadulterated terror. Vivian straightened her spine. The fear evaporated. She wasn't Mrs. Calloway anymore. She was coming home. The spotlight burned, but for the first time in her marriage, Vivian didn't feel the urge to shrink away. She felt the heat of the light as fuel, The silence in the ballroom was finally broken by a collective intake of breath, followed by a frantic explosion of whispers. Champagne glasses clinked as hands shook. The elite of New York were recalibrating their entire social hierarchy in real time. Preston Calloway stood frozen, his hand halfway extended toward his mistress, Sienna. He looked like a man trying to solve a physics equation in a language he didn't speak. "Vivian?" he stammered, his voice cracking. He took a step toward her, his polished shoes squeaking on the marble floor. "Vivian, what is he talking about? Is this a skit?" He looked around for a camera crew, a director, anyone to tell him this was a practical joke. But there was only the stone-faced glare of Richard Sterling on the stage and the blinding white light encircling his wife. Vivian didn't answer him. She didn't even look at him. She simply lifted her chin, the emerald fabric of her dress cascading around her like armor, and began to walk. She didn't walk towards the coat check. She walked towards the stage. As she moved, the crowd parted. These were people who, minutes ago, wouldn't have looked Vivian in the eye if she were on fire. Now billionaires stepped back, bowing their heads slightly. Socialites pulled their trains out of her path. It was a corridor of sudden, terrifying respect. "Vivian, wait!" Preston's shock morphed into panic. His brain was finally catching up. Sterling! If she was a Sterling, that meant the prenup was garbage. That meant the allowance was an insult. That meant he had been treating the heiress to the largest private fortune in America like a servant. He lunged forward, abandoning Sienna near the chocolate fountain. "Honey, sweetheart, wait up!" He tried to grab her elbow, his fingers seeking the familiar, bruising grip he usually employed when he wanted to control her. Smack! The sound echoed through the room. Vivian hadn't slapped his face. She had slapped his hand away. It was a sharp, dismissive strike, the kind one might use on a misbehaving dog. She stopped. The spotlight stopped with her. She slowly turned her head to look at him. "Don't," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the acoustic perfection of the ballroom it carried. "Do not touch me." Preston recoiled, blinking rapidly. "Vivian, baby, everyone is watching. Let's just go outside and talk about this. You're upset about Sienna. I get it. I can explain. It's business." "Business?" Vivian repeated. A cold smile touched her lips. "You're right, Preston. It is business." She turned back to the stage and continued her ascent. Preston tried to follow. "Vivian, stop! You're making a scene!" He reached the base of the stairs just as she reached the top. He placed a foot on the first step and was immediately met by a wall of black muscle. Two of Richard Sterling's personal security detail, men who looked like they were carved from granite, stepped in front of him. "Sir," one of them rumbled, placing a hand on Preston's chest. "Access is restricted." "Restricted? That's my wife!" Preston shouted, his face flushing a mottled red. "Get out of my way, Vivian, tell them!" "None." Vivian reached the podium. She stood next to her father. Richard Sterling looked at her, and the hardness in his eyes melted. He reached out and took her hand, the hand Preston had refused to hold on the red carpet, and raised it to his lips. "I'm sorry it took so long, Vivi," Richard whispered, his voice caught by the microphone. "I'm here now, Dad," she replied. Richard turned to the crowd, his arm wrapped protectively around Vivian's shoulders. He looked down at Preston, who was currently arguing with the security guard, while Sienna tried to awkwardly inch away into the crowd. "Mr. Calloway!" Richard boomed. Preston froze. He looked up, sweating. "I believe," Richard said, his voice dripping with disdain, "that you told my daughter she was ruining the shot earlier this evening. Is that correct?" Preston swallowed hard. "Mr. Sterling, sir, it was a misunderstanding. Vivian and I have a playful relationship. We joke. I didn't know—" "You didn't know she was rich," Richard finished for him. "If you had, you would have treated her like a queen. But because you thought she was poor, you treated her like garbage. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Richard gestured to the AV booth. "Show it." The giant screen behind the stage, usually reserved for charity statistics and donor names, flickered. Suddenly the footage from the red carpet appeared. It was high definition. It showed Preston shoving Vivian. It showed the sneer on his face. It showed him pulling Sienna close. The room gasped. Seeing it on a 20-foot screen made the cruelty undeniable. "This is the man," Richard narrated, "who has been begging my company, Sterling Industries, for a $500 million loan to save his Hudson Yards project. He claimed he was a family man with traditional values." Richard laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Preston Calloway, your loan application is officially denied." The announcement hit Preston like a physical blow. He staggered back, nearly tripping over the security guard's foot. "Denied?" he wheezed. No, you can't do that. We have a verbal agreement. I've leveraged everything on that project. If the financing falls through, I'm bankrupt. I'm ruined." "You were ruined the moment you pushed my daughter out of that frame," Richard said calmly. "But I'm not done." Richard stepped back from the podium and gestured for Vivian to take the microphone. Vivian stepped forward. She looked out at the sea of faces. She saw the women who had mocked her cheap shoes. She saw the men who had ignored her handshakes to talk to Preston. She took a deep breath. She felt lighter than she had in years. "For 5 years," Vivian began, her voice steady, "I lived in a cage. I thought if I made myself smaller, quieter, cheaper, that eventually I would be loved. I thought that if I hid my name, I would find someone who loved me. Not the checkbook." She looked down at Preston. He was pale, his hands trembling. "I found a man who loved neither," she said. "You didn't love me, Preston, and you certainly didn't respect me. You loved the control. You loved having a punching bag you could come home to." "Vivian, please," Preston begged, his voice rising in hysteria. "Don't do this here. We can work this out. I love you. I've always loved you. Sienna means nothing. She's just an intern." Somewhere in the crowd, Sienna gasped. "Excuse me," she shrieked. "You told me you were leaving her. You bought me a Tesla." "Shut up," Preston screamed at Sienna, cracking completely. Vivian laughed. It was a genuine, joyful sound. "Oh, Preston, you still think this is about my feelings. You think I'm just a scorned woman who wants an apology." She leaned into the mic. "I don't want an apology. I want a liquidation." She reached into a clutch and pulled out a folded document. "You see, Preston, while you were busy hiding assets and setting up offshore accounts to make sure I'd get nothing in a divorce, I was busy too. You wouldn't let me work, remember? You said it looked bad. So I had a lot of free time." She unfolded the paper. "I used that time to manage my own portfolio. Under a pseudonym, of course. Have you heard of the investment firm VS Holdings?" Preston's eyes bulged. "VS Holdings? They're the ones buying up the debt on the Hudson Yards towers. They own the mortgage on our penthouse. They own the lease on your office building." "VS," Vivian clarified. "Vivian Sterling. That's me, Preston. I own your debt. I own your house. I own the chair you sit in at work." A murmur of awe rippled through the room. This wasn't just revenge. It was a corporate assassination. "And," Vivian continued, "as the primary creditor of Calloway Real Estate, I am calling in the loans. Immediately." "You can't!" Preston screamed. "That puts me in default. I'll lose everything." "That's the point," Vivian said coldly. "You wanted a trophy wife, Preston. You wanted someone to look good on your arm while you built your empire. Well, congratulations. You built your empire on land that I own. And I'm evicting you." She looked at the security guards. "Please escort Mr. Calloway out. He's trespassing on private property." "This is a public museum," Preston spluttered. "Actually," Richard Sterling interjected, stepping back to the mic with a smirk, "the Sterling Foundation made a rather large donation to the museum this morning. In exchange, we rented the entire venue for the night. This is a private party, and you are not on the list." Frank, the security guard from the red carpet, the one who had shown Vivian kindness, stepped forward from the shadows near the stage. He looked at Preston, then up at Vivian. Vivian gave him a small nod. Frank grinned. He grabbed Preston by the back of his tuxedo jacket. "Time to go, Mr. Calloway," Frank said. "Get your hands off me." "Do you know who I am?" Preston shouted, thrashing as Frank and another guard dragged him backward. "We know exactly who you are," Vivian called out, her voice ringing clear over the crowd. "You're my ex-husband." As they dragged him towards the exit, Preston passed Sienna. He reached out to her, desperate. "Sienna, call my lawyer. Call the press." Sienna looked at Preston, sweating and pathetic, being hauled out like trash. Then she looked up at the stage, where Vivian Sterling stood bathed in light, the daughter of a billionaire, the owner of the city. Sienna turned her back on Preston. She pulled out her phone and snapped a selfie with Vivian in the background. "Sorry, Preston," Sienna muttered. "I don't date broke guys." The doors slammed shut behind him. For a second, the room was silent. Then, slowly, someone started clapping. It was Beatrice, the gossip columnist. Then the CEO of Chimera Tech joined in. Then the mayor. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was erupting in applause. Vivian stood there, trembling slightly as the adrenaline faded. Her father squeezed her shoulder. "You did good, kid," he whispered, "but we're not done yet." Vivian looked at him. "We're not." "No," Richard said, his expression darkening as he looked towards the VIP tables where the board of directors of Calloway's partners sat. "Preston was just the symptom. Now we need to cure the disease. He didn't act alone. His board enabled him. His lawyers helped him hide the money. And I want them all." Vivian smiled, but this time it wasn't a smile of relief. It was a smile of ambition. "Well then," she said, smoothing her dress, "let's get to work." The sun rose over Manhattan, but for Preston Calloway, it felt like the onset of a nuclear winter. It was 8 a.m. The headquarters of Calloway Real Estate, a glass monolith overlooking Central Park, was usually a temple of hushed efficiency. Today, it was a disaster zone. The phones hadn't stopped ringing since the gala ended. The stock price had opened at $45 a share and was currently trading at $12. Preston sat in his corner office, staring at the ticker on his computer screen. He was still wearing his tuxedo trousers from the night before, his white shirt unbuttoned, stained with sweat and scotch. He hadn't slept. Across from him sat Arthur Banks, the company's general counsel and Preston's personal fixer. Arthur was a man who charged $1,200 an hour to make problems disappear, but he looked as helpless as a fresh intern. "Stop pacing, Arthur," Preston snapped, his voice hoarse. "Fix this. Draft a press release. Say it was a deep fake. Say Sterling is senile. Anything." Arthur ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Preston, there were 500 witnesses. It was live-streamed. We can't spin this." VS Holdings, Vivian, filed an injunction at 6 a.m. She's frozen the corporate accounts. "We can't even pay the cleaning staff." "She can't do that!" Preston slammed his fist on the mahogany desk. "This is my company. My grandfather built this. And you leveraged it to the hilt to fund the Hudson Yards expansion," Arthur reminded him grimly. "The debt covenants are clear. If the stock drops below a certain threshold, the majority creditor can seize operational control. Vivian isn't just a creditor, Preston. Mathematically speaking, she's the CEO." The intercom on Preston's desk buzzed. It was his secretary, her voice trembling. "Mr. Calloway, she's here." Preston's stomach dropped. "Who?" "Mrs. Calloway and a lot of other people." Preston rushed to the glass wall that looked out over the bullpen. The elevator doors at the end of the hall slid open. But it wasn't the tentative, shy Vivian who usually stopped by to bring him lunch. Lunches he would often throw in the trash. This Vivian was a warlord. She wore a navy blue power suit, tailored to razor-sharp perfection. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She wasn't walking, she was marching. Flanking her were 6 people in dark suits, not bodyguards, lawyers. And behind them a dozen men and women carrying bankers' boxes and laptops, forensic accountants. "Block the door!" Preston shouted, though nobody moved. Vivian swept through the double-glass doors of the executive suite. The office fell silent. Typists stopped typing. Junior associates stared with their mouths open. Arthur Banks stepped out of the office, trying to muster his usual arrogance. "Now hold on a minute, Mrs. Calloway. You can't just barge in here with a cavalcade of—" "Save it, Arthur." Vivian didn't even break stride. She walked past him, tossing a thick file onto the nearest desk. "You're fired for gross negligence and conspiracy to commit fraud. Security will escort you out. If you take so much as a stapler, I'll have you arrested." Arthur gaped. "You can't fire me. I answer to the board." "I am the board," Vivian retorted. She reached Preston's office. Preston stood behind his desk, trying to look imposing, but looking mostly like a cornered animal. "Vivian," he started, his voice shaking. "Let's be reasonable. We're husband and wife." "Ex-husband," she corrected. "And this is no longer a marriage counseling session, Preston. This is a hostile takeover." She walked around the desk, his desk, and sat in his chair. She spun it around to face him. "You have a meeting with the investors in 10 minutes, Vivian said, glancing at the gold clock on the wall. "Sit down. We have work to do." "I'm not sitting until you tell me what's going on," Preston yelled. Vivian nodded to one of the men she had brought with her. "This is Mr. Henderson, lead auditor for Sterling Industries. He's been reviewing your books all night." Mr. Henderson, a man with glasses thick enough to see into the future, cleared his throat. "Mr. Calloway, we've found some irregularities, specifically regarding the consulting fees paid to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, a company registered to a Miss Sienna Blake." Preston went white. "Embezzlement," Vivian said, the word hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. "You were siphoning company funds to pay for your mistress's apartment, her car, her jewelry. That's not just grounds for divorce, Preston. That's a felony. That's prison." Preston collapsed into the guest chair. The fight drained out of him instantly. Prison. He was a Calloway. Calloways didn't go to prison. They went to the Hamptons. "What do you want?" he whispered. "I'll give you the divorce. I'll sign whatever you want. Just don't call the feds." Vivian leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. "I want full liquidation of your personal assets to repay the shareholders. The penthouse, the Hamptons estate, the yacht, the cars, all of it. You leave this marriage with exactly what I came into it with. Nothing." "You can't leave me destitute. I'm a Calloway." "You're a thief," she said simply, "and I'm being generous. My father wanted to press charges immediately. I convinced him to let me handle it quietly, provided you cooperate." Preston buried his face in his hands. He was beaten. The arrogance of the night before was a distant memory. He was just a small man in a big chair, and the chair didn't belong to him anymore. Suddenly the glass doors to the office flew open with a force that rattled the frame. "Get away from him!" The voice was shrill, imperious, and dripping with venom. Vivian looked up. Standing in the doorway was a woman in a Chanel suit, clutching a Hermès bag like a weapon. Her face was pulled tight by expensive surgery, her eyes cold and hard. It was Catherine Calloway, Preston's mother, the matriarch. Catherine had terrified Vivian for years. She was the one who told Vivian she wasn't allowed to wear red because it was too common. She was the one who instructed the staff not to look Vivian in the eye. But today, Vivian didn't flinch. "Hello, Catherine," Vivian said coolly. "You're late. The board meeting has already started." Catherine marched into the room, ignoring her sobbing son, and slammed her handbag onto the desk. "You insolent little gold digger," Catherine spat. "You think because your absentee father finally decided to claim you, you can steal my family's legacy? I will bury you in litigation for the next 50 years. I have judges in my contact list who owe me favors you can't even imagine." Vivian didn't blink. She slowly picked up a remote control and pressed a button. The privacy blinds on the glass walls lowered, shutting out the staring employees. "Actually, Catherine," Vivian said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "I was hoping you would show up, because while Preston is a thief, he's also an idiot. He couldn't have set up those Cayman accounts by himself." Catherine stiffened. Vivian opened a second folder, a red one. "Mr. Henderson found the wire transfers," Vivian continued, "but he also found the authorization signatures. They weren't Preston's, they were yours." Catherine's face lost its color beneath the heavy makeup. "You were the one funneling the money," Vivian realized aloud, her eyes narrowing. "Preston was just spending it. You were the one draining the company dry to maintain your lifestyle, because the trust fund ran out years ago, didn't it?" Catherine said nothing. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "The Calloway fortune is a myth," Vivian said, realizing the truth as she spoke. "You're broke. You've been broke for a decade. You needed Preston to marry rich or find a big deal to keep the Ponzi scheme going. That's why you hated me. Because I was poor. I didn't bring any fresh cash to bail you out." Vivian stood up. She towered over the older woman. "Well, Catherine, I have cash now. But I'm not using it to bail you out. I'm using it to buy you out." She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk toward Catherine. "This is a confession," Vivian said, "admitting to the embezzlement. If you sign it, I will simply seize the assets and let you retire to a small condo in Florida. If you don't sign it, I hand this red folder to the FBI, and you and your son can share a cell." Catherine looked at the paper. She looked at Preston, who was too broken to even look up. She looked at Vivian, the girl she had called trash, and saw a woman who held the power of life and death over her dynasty. Catherine's hand trembled as she reached into her bag. She didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a Mont Blanc pen. "You win," Catherine whispered, her voice full of hate. "You win, you hateful girl." "Sign it," Vivian commanded. Catherine signed. Vivian took the paper, checked the signature, and handed it to Mr. Henderson. "Get them out of my building," Vivian said, turning her chair back to the computer. "I have a company to save." Security guards stepped forward. Preston stood up, wiping his nose on his sleeve. He looked at Vivian one last time. "Vivian, did you ever love me?" he asked weakly. Vivian paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She didn't look back. "I loved the man I thought you were, Preston," she said, "but that man never existed." She started typing. "Goodbye." Preston and Catherine were escorted out. As the elevator doors closed on them, Vivian let out a long breath. She slumped slightly in the chair. "Are you okay, Mrs. Calloway?" "I mean, Miss Sterling?" Mr. Henderson asked, gently. Vivian straightened up. She looked at the ticker. The stock had stopped falling. In fact, in the last 5 minutes, it had ticked up by 2 points. The market liked the change in management. "I'm fine, Henderson," she said, her eyes stealing over. "But we're not done. Preston and Catherine were just the incompetents. Now I have to deal with the betrayal." "Betrayal, Ma'am?" "Yes," Vivian said, pulling up a new file on her screen. It was a list of names. Sienna Blake wasn't just a mistress. She was a plant. Someone sent her to destroy Preston's marriage and distract him while they shorted the stock. She pointed to a name on the digital list. "Get my father on the phone," Vivian said. "I know who was pulling the strings, and he's going to wish he never messed with a Sterling." The conference room at Calloway Real Estate felt less like a corporate office and more like a war bunker. The morning sun glared off the glass table, illuminating a complex web of financial data on the main screen. Vivian sat at the head of the table, flanked by her father, Richard Sterling, and the lead auditor, Mr. Henderson. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and high-stakes tension. "It doesn't add up," Vivian murmured, staring at the timeline. Preston was incompetent, yes, But the timing of the collapse was too precise. Look at the stock activity. She pointed to a jagged red line on the screen. 3 days before the gala, before the scandal even broke, someone took out a massive short position against Callaway Real Estate. They bet millions that the stock would tank this week. Insider trading? Richard asked, cleaning his glasses. Calculated destruction, Vivian corrected. She swiped to the next slide, revealing a photo of Sienna Blake. I had investigators look into Sienna. 6 months ago, she was a waitress in New Jersey. Then she moved into a $10,000 a month Soho apartment. The deposit wasn't paid by Preston. It was paid by Obsidian LLC. Henderson tapped his keyboard. Obsidian is a shell company, a wholly owned subsidiary of Kincaid Global. The name sucked the oxygen out of the room. Silas Kincaid, Richard's arch rival, a corporate raider known for stripping companies for parts. He set Preston up, Vivian realized, her voice cold. Kincaid planted Sienna to seduce Preston, cause a public scandal, and tank the stock price so he could buy the Hudson Yards land for pennies on the dollar. As if summoned, the secure phone on the table buzzed. Vivian answered on speaker. "Vivian, darling," Silas Kincaid's voice oozed through the room, smooth and predatory. "Or should I say the new CEO? Quite the show last night." "Cut the crap, Silas," Vivian said. "Fine, let's talk business," Kincaid chuckled. "You've had your revenge, sir, but you are holding a sinking ship. The debt is toxic. I'm offering you a lifeline. I'll buy Callaway Real Estate for $15 a share. You walk away clean." $15 is robbery, Richard barked. "The assets are worth 50. "The offer expires at 5 p.m., Kincaid countered, unfazed. "Meet me at Teterboro Airport to sign the surrender, or I let the market know I'm walking away, and your stock goes to zero." The line went dead. "He has us," Henderson said, pale. "If we don't sell, he'll use his media contacts to bury us." Vivian stood up, walking to the window. She looked out at the skyline, her reflection merging with the steel giants outside. Kincaid saw her as a scorned wife, an amateur. That was his mistake. "He wants to play with sharks." Vivian turned back, a dangerous smile playing on her lips. "Let's show him teeth. Henderson, pull up Kincaid's balance sheet." The auditor obeyed. Vivian scanned the numbers. "Just as I thought. He's cash poor. He's leveraged everything to buy tech startups. He needs our land to cover his own margin calls." "What are you proposing?" Richard asked, leaning forward. "A Pac-Man defense," Vivian declared. "The target eats the attacker. Kincaid is watching our stock, not his own. Dad, use the sterling cash reserves. Start buying Kincaid Global stock. Use every shell company we have. By 5 p.m., I want to own him." 2 hours later, Teterboro Airport. The tarmac was windswept and grey. Silas Kincaid stood at the base of his Gulfstream jet, swirling a tumbler of scotch. He checked his watch as a black limousine pulled up. Vivian stepped out alone, wearing a white trench coat that whipped in the wind. She carried a single leather folder. "Punctual," Kincaid smirked. "I assume you have the surrender papers?" Vivian approached him, her expression unreadable. "I have papers, but not for surrender. Don't be difficult, Vivian. I did you a favor. I exposed a bad marriage. Now sign the deal." "You ruined a family for a piece of land," Vivian said calmly. "But you taught me something, Silas. You taught me that I needed to be stronger." She handed him the folder. "Counteroffer?" Kincaid asked, bored. He opened it. He scanned the first page and his smirk vanished. He flipped to the second page, his face draining of color. This is impossible." "It's a disclosure of ownership," Vivian said, her voice cutting through the wind. "As of 10 minutes ago, VS Holdings and Sterling Industries have acquired 51.4% of Kincaid Global's voting stock." Kincaid looked up, terrified. You bought my company?" "I bought your debt, I bought your loans, and I bought your board," Vivian corrected. You were so busy looking at Calloway, you forgot to lock your own back door. I'll sue you, Kincaid hissed. You'll resign, Vivian countered. Immediately, and you will sell me your remaining shares at $10. If you refuse, I hand the SEC the proof of your little Sienna Blake scheme. Prison doesn't suit men of your age, Silas. Kincaid slumped against the railing of the stairs. He looked at the woman he had underestimated, realizing too late that he hadn't been fighting a socialite. He had been fighting a sterling. He pulled a gold pen from his pocket and signed the paper with a shaking hand. "Get off my tarmac," he spat, thrusting the folder back at her. "Actually," Vivian said, clutching the folder, "it's my jet now. Company asset. You can take an Uber." She turned and walked back to her limo, leaving the billionaire stranded on the concrete, watching his empire fly away. The lobby of Sterling Tower was less a room and more a cathedral of capitalism. The ceilings soared 3 stories high, supported by pillars of black marble that gleamed under the recessed lighting. When Vivian pushed through the heavy revolving doors, the atmosphere in the cavernous space shifted instantly. The security guards, usually stoic statues, straightened their ties. The receptionist ceased her typing, her hands hovering over the keyboard. Vivian wasn't just entering a building, she was stepping into her dominion. Yet, amidst the polished stone and bespoke suits, a discordant note sat on a sleek leather bench near the lobby fountain. It was Sienna Blake. The transformation was jarring. Only 24 hours ago, Sienna had been the glittering jewel of the Met Gala, draped in diamonds and smug assurance. Now she looked like a ghost. She wore an oversized grey hoodie and jeans, clutching a paper coffee cup with both hands, as if it were the only warm thing left in her world. Her makeup was smeared, the remnants of a long night spent crying. When she spotted Vivian, Sienna scrambled to her feet, nearly knocking over her cup. "Vivian, Mrs. Calloway, please," Sienna stammered, her voice echoing awkwardly in the silent lobby. Vivian didn't break her stride. She walked toward the private elevator bank, her heels clicking a sharp, rhythmic beat on the floor. "You have 30 seconds, Sienna. Walk with me or leave." Sienna rushed to catch up, her sneakers squeaking. "You have to help me," she pleaded, her voice rising in desperation. "Kincaid, he cut me off. He promised me a career. He said if I helped him expose Preston, he'd make me a star. But his assets are frozen. My landlord is evicting me today. I have nowhere to go." Vivian pressed the call button. The golden doors slid open, and she stepped inside. Sienna tried to follow, but Vivian raised a single hand, stopping her at the threshold. "Stay," Vivian commanded. Sienna froze, trembling. "Vivian, please, I was just doing a job. I didn't know he was going to destroy the whole company. I'm just like you were. I came from nothing. I just wanted a chance." Vivian looked at the shivering girl. For a fleeting second, pity stirred in her chest. Sienna was just collateral damage, a pawn sacrificed by men playing a game she didn't understand. But then, the memory of the red carpet returned. The shove, the laughter, the selfie. "You are nothing like me," Vivian said, her voice soft but unyielding. "I married for love, and I was punished for it. You destroyed a family for a paycheck. Now you're surprised the check bounced." "I'll tell the press," Sienna threatened, tears spilling over. "I'll tell them Kincaid set me up." Kincaid signed a full confession an hour ago to avoid federal prison, Vivian replied calmly. "You aren't a whistleblower, Sienna. You're an accomplice to corporate espionage. If you go to the press, the FBI will be waiting. Go back to New Jersey. Get a job. And the next time a rich man promises you the world in exchange for your dignity, remember this moment." The elevator doors slid shut, severing the connection. Vivian took a deep breath as the car ascended, leaving the wreckage of the past on the ground floor. She entered the penthouse suite to find her father, Richard, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Is it done?" he asked, not turning from the view. "It's done," Vivian confirmed. "And Preston?" Vivian poured a glass of water, her hand steady. He's sleeping on a friend's couch in the East Village. His lawyers tried to file for alimony this morning. They thought they had a case. Richard raised an eyebrow. And? The prenup, Vivian said, a small, ironic smile touching her lips. The one he forced me to sign to protect his family wealth. It explicitly waives all spousal support for the poorer spouse. Since I am now the majority shareholder of his debts, the court ruled that I am the wealthier spouse. His own contract protects me from paying him a dime. Richard chuckled, a low, satisfied sound. Poetic justice. Vivian joined him at the window. The sun was setting over Manhattan, bathing the city in a deep, burning gold. I thought I would feel tired, she whispered, but I don't. You saved the legacy, Vivi. No, she corrected him, watching the lights of the city flicker on below. I reinvented it. Or 1 year later, the flashbulbs were blinding, a strobe light storm that turned the night into day. The red carpet rolled out in front of the newly completed Sterling Calloway Tower was thick and plush, leading to glass doors that reflected the flashing cameras. This wasn't a charity gala. It was a coronation. A black limousine idled at the curb. The door opened, and Vivian Sterling stepped out. She wore a gown of deep crimson silk that flowed like liquid fire. She moved with a terrifying grace, her chin held high, looking directly into the lens of every camera. She wasn't clinging to anyone's arm. Behind her walked her new board of directors, a phalanx of brilliant minds she had hand-selected. "Miss Sterling! Over here!" a photographer screamed. "How does it feel to be on the cover of Time?" Vivian paused, offering the cameras a rare, genuine smile. "It feels correct." At the edge of the crowd, pressed against the metal barricades, a man in a cheap black vest and bow tie stood on his tiptoes. He was holding a silver tray laden with empty champagne flutes. It was Preston. The year had not been kind to him. His hair was thinning, his face lined with the exhaustion of a man who worked double shifts, catering parties he used to host. He stared at the woman on the carpet, transfixed. "Hey, buddy, move it," a cameraman grunted, shouldering Preston aside. "You're blocking the shot of the Queen." Preston stumbled, gripping his tray. He looked up at the giant LED screen above the entrance, broadcasting Vivian's face to the world. She looked powerful. She looked happy. She looked untouchable. "I knew her," Preston whispered, his voice lost in the cheering crowd. "I used to be married to her." The cameraman laughed, not even looking at him. "Yeah, sure, pal. And I used to date a supermodel. Now go get me a refill." Preston looked down at his empty tray, then back at Vivian. She was cutting the ceremonial ribbon with golden scissors, bathed in adoration. She didn't know he was there. He wasn't an enemy anymore. He was just background noise. He turned and walked towards the service entrance, disappearing into the shadows of the alleyway. On the stage, the ribbon fell. The crowd roared. Vivian Sterling looked at her father in the front row, then up at the steel spire of the tower she had built from the ashes of her old life. For the first time, she wasn't waiting for permission to exist. She had finally arrived, and that is the story of Vivian Sterling, from a humiliated wife pushed out of the frame to the CEO who bought the camera, the film, and the entire studio. It's a brutal reminder that you should never mistake silence for weakness, and you should never, ever judge someone by who they are standing next to. Preston Calloway thought he held all the cards, but he forgot that the Queen is the most powerful piece on the board. Vivian didn't just get revenge, she got justice. She proved that the best way to get back at the people who hurt you isn't to scream, it's to succeed. Now I want to hear from you. If you were Vivian, would you have forgiven Preston when he begged in the office? Or was leaving him with absolutely nothing the only right choice? And what about Sienna? Did she deserve a second chance, or did she get exactly what was coming to her? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, power, and ultimate redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. We have a crazy tale coming up next week about a lottery winner who kept his fortune secret from his greedy family for 10 years. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and remember, the spotlight can shift in a second. Make sure you're ready when it lands on you.